Hello everyone, Dr. Polaris here. Among the many diverse groups of herbivorous dinosaurs, the Thyreophorans notably stand out due to their development of extensive armoured hides formed from bony osteoderms. These animals first appeared roughly 200 million years ago at an early stage in Ornithischian evolution, being one of the first major lineages to diverge during the Great Dinosaur Radiation that took place after the end Triassic extinction event. In addition to the possession of armour, key Thyreophoran traits include wide flaring jugal bones, remodelling of the skull dermal bone, downturned dentaries, and forelimbs that were significantly shorter than the hind limbs. While the famous and iconic Stegosaurs and Ankylosaurs were robust, bulky animals, the oldest and most basal Thyreophorans were small and comparatively slender animals, such as the genus Scutellosaurus, native to the Kayenta Formation of what is now Arizona during the Sinemurian stage of the early Jurassic, circa 196 million years ago. This little animal measured about 1.3 metres or 4.3 feet long, and weighed approximately 3 kilograms or 6.6 pounds. Known from a relatively well-preserved holotype specimen, Scutellosaurus was a bipedal herbivore with a lithe build, a proportionally long tail, and an armoured hide formed from several hundred small studded osteoderms that run along the body in parallel rows. Dwelling in a dry, semi-desert ecosystem, Scutellosaurus probably fed on soft plant matter, and was the most common dinosaur present in the Kayenta Formation, living alongside the sauropodomorph Ceratosaurus, as well as the infamous early theropod Dilophosaurus, which almost certainly hunted the small Thyreophoran. Unlike later members of this clade, Scutellosaurus would have still been able to run away from predators, instead of just hunkering down and swinging a formidable armoured tail. Other early forms include the far more poorly known genus Emalsaurus, from the Toarcian stage of northern Germany. This was a larger animal than Scutellosaurus, with the juvenile holotype specimen measuring up to 2.5 metres or 8.2 feet long. Fully grown individuals are estimated to have reached between 3 and 4 metres long, and reached weights comparable to an adult human. These animals were also covered in osteoderm armour, although it's currently unclear just how extensive this was, while the skull and jaws indicate a specialisation for feeding on low-growing cycads. In a slightly more derived position within Thyreophora was the older and thankfully much better understood genus Scelidosaurus from the UK. Known from multiple excellently preserved specimens ranging from juveniles to fully grown adults. This low-slung, roughly 4 metre or 13 foot long animal possessed a small narrow skull, relatively elongated forelimbs, and a heavy-set body coated in osteoderms of varying size and shape, with these being notably large and plate-like around the neck. This would have proven highly beneficial for the slow-moving herbivore, as contemporary theropods would have likely targeted the exposed necks of their prey when hunting. While it was traditionally assumed that Scelidosaurus was quadrupedal, fossilised trackways from the early Jurassic of Poland have revealed the presence of large basal Thyreophorans that were capable of bipedal locomotion, indicating that Scelidosaurus may have done the same. The teeth and jaws remained relatively primitive, being comparable to those of the later Stegosaurs, indicating a diet of soft plant matter that included ferns, horsetails, and low-growing conifers. Given that basal Thyreophorans such as this were thought to have died out during the early Jurassic by around 180 million years ago, then you can understand just how much of a shock it was to uncover a similar animal from the Cretaceous period. With this of course being the wonderfully weird South American genus Jacopil, native to the Albion-aged Candeleros Formation of Argentina between circa 111 and 106 million years ago. This odd herbivore measured about 1.5 metres or 4.9 feet long, and weighed up to 7 kilograms or 15.4 pounds, being about the size of a small domestic dog. In some respects, Jacopil was somewhat reminiscent of the far older Scutellosaurus, both in overall size and their shared bipedal stances, although Jacopil possessed a number of highly distinct features, including a well-developed predentary bone, a feature that was either absent or cartilaginous in other Thyreophorans, large low osteoderms, and a short blunt skull that superficially appeared almost ceratopsian-like. In fact, given this odd mixture of traits, it's sometimes been argued that Jacopil may have been some sort of unique armoured basal ceratopsian. However, most studies have found this animal to have been a late surviving basal Thyreophoran, with a very long ghost lineage that stretched back to the early Jurassic. The genus dwelt in a desert region and was well adapted for feeding on tough xeric vegetation, with its teeth showing high amounts of wear. In this environment, Jacopil lived alongside a variety of other dinosaurs that included the enormous Carcharodontosaur Giganotosaurus, the narrow-jawed Ununleigine Buitroraptor, and the up to 3 metre long basal Coelurosaur Bicentenaria, which was probably a major predator of Jacopil. In a recent 2024 study by Fonseca et al., this genus was recovered as the sister taxon to the clade Eurypoda, which contains both the stegosaurs and ankylosaurs, as well as their more basal relatives. The authors also suggested that Jacopil may have been a very basal ankylosaur, mentioning that an identity as a member of Parankylosauria would not be out of the question. This recently established clade of armoured dinosaurs were also endemic to the southern hemisphere, and are often considered to have been very early diverging ankylosaurs, perhaps splitting off during the Middle Jurassic, although some recent studies have found them to form a unique sister group to ankylosaurs instead. Whatever they were, Parankylosaurs were native to what is now South America, Antarctica and Australia during the second half of the Cretaceous period between 105 and 70 million years ago. Until the late 2010s, potential Gondwanan ankylosaur remains were very scrappy and poorly understood, although this thankfully began to change with the description of the genus Stegoros in 2021. This small animal was endemic to what is now southern Chile during the Campanian and early Maastrichtian between 74 and 71 million years ago, known from a semi-articulated and near-complete holotype specimen which measured up to 2 metres or 6.6 feet long, and displayed some unusual traits that were not present in other ankylosaurids, including vertebral characteristics shared with stegosaurs, small pelvic girdles, relatively long slender legs and unfused skull bones. Like ankylosaurids, Stegoros possessed defensive osteoderm armour across its body, in addition to a bony shield over the hips. Although this genus was comparatively quite lightly armoured, the tail was short, with the tip bearing 7 rows of greatly enlarged osteoderms that formed a distinctive muckwheat-like structure that was almost certainly utilised for intraspecific combat over territory or mating rights. Living in a coastal forested ecosystem that teemed with rivers, Stegoros fed on low-growing vegetation, which were processed with small leaf-shaped teeth, and lived alongside the hadrosauroid Gonkoken and a variety of herbivorous mesongulated mammals. In addition to Stegoros, the slightly larger and more heavily built genus Patagopelta was also native to southern South America during the Campanian and Maastrichtian, in this case being an inhabitant of the Allen Formation of Argentina. Originally classified as a nodosaurid, more recent studies have found Patagopelta to be a parankylosaur instead, with the animal found to possess a very similar tail weapon to that of Stegoros. Meanwhile, the once mysterious genus Antarctopelta, from where else but Antarctica, has also been reclassified as a parankylosaur, in fact being the largest known member of the group at about 4 metres or 13 feet long. It lived in the cool temperate coastal forests and swamps of the Maastrichtian Snow Hill Island Formation, alongside elasmerian ornithopods, a variety of diving seabirds, and the Ununleigine Imperobata. Parankylosaurs were also found in Australia as well, indicating a broad south polar distribution that very likely also included Zealandia as well. By far the most famous of these was the genus Minmi, which was the first specimen of a thyreophoran to be found in the southern hemisphere. Named in 1980, the holotype was recovered from the Albion-aged Bungill Formation of Queensland and dated to between 120 and 112 million years ago, making Minmi the oldest parankylosaur known so far. This specimen was quite scrappy and consisted of back vertebrae, ribs, a right hind limb and plates of belly armour. In life, this animal would have been about 3 metres long, although most depictions of it produced between the 1980s and 2015 were based on a substantially more complete second specimen that has since been placed in the separate genus Cunbarasaurus. This was a younger animal than Minmi, being an inhabitant of the late Albian and possibly Cenomanian stages of the Alaru Formation. It's known from a near-complete and incredibly well-preserved holotype specimen, which is something almost unheard of in Australian dinosaur paleontology. Cunbarasaurus measured between 2.5 and 3.5 metres long, and possessed a heavily armoured body equipped with an elongated flattened skull that was capable of orally processing plant matter, with preserved gut content revealing that this herbivore didn't rely on gastroliths to grind up its food. If Parankylosauros like Kunbarosaurus were indeed their own unique group of thyreophorans outside of Ankylosauria, then they must possess a very long ghost lineage that stretches back into the Middle Jurassic, despite all known forms hailing from the Cretaceous, which helps to explain the many archaic features of their skeletons. If Parankylosaurs are removed, then we are left with the clade Ankylosauria, which contains the Ankylosaurids, Nodosaurids, and their more basal relatives. Some defining traits of this group include more extensive armour plating that covered much of their bodies, in some cases including even the eyelids, rigid vertebral columns, heavily constructed skulls covered with fused dermal bone, and a very wide flattened pelvis. The legs were stout and robust, with Ankylosaurs having very low slung postures and simple leaf-shaped teeth for slicing through vegetation. They also tended to possess unusually large hyoid bones that supported long muscular tongues to compensate for weak or reduced teeth. The oldest ankylosaur so far known was the odd and striking genus Spicomelus from the Middle Jurassic of Morocco. This animal was first described in 2021 on the basis of a holotype specimen that consisted of a single rib complete with fused spiky osteoderms, a trait not seen in any other ankylosaur. Additional specimens later revealed that Spicomelus would have resembled a big walking pincushion, with highly elongated and sharp osteoderms emerging from the back of the neck and the pelvic region, in addition to having a tail adapted for swinging at rivals and predators. Although the exact type of structures present at the tail tip are not known, it's been estimated to have measured up to 4 meters long and weighed roughly 1 metric ton, with the variety of spikes and spines lining the body being utilised for both display and defence. Spicomelus was endemic to the Bathonian-aged El Mars Formation, and lived alongside 2 genera of early stegosaurs, with these being Adriticlet and Thyreosaurus, demonstrating that thyreophorans as a whole were diversifying rapidly at this time. Other early and basal ankylosaurs include the poorly known genus Sarcolestes from the Middle Jurassic of the UK circa 165 million years ago, being a few million years younger than Spicomelus, but is only known from a partial left mandible and a fused scoot. Ironically, its name means flesh thief, even though the animal would have been a slow-moving herbivore. Most Jurassic ankylosaurs are similarly known from very scrappy material, although a few genera from towards the end of the period are thankfully better known, including 2 genera that were present at the famous late Jurassic Morrison Formation of western North America. These included Maimuropelta, from the Brushy Basin member of Colorado between 155 and 150 million years ago, which was a modestly sized ankylosaur at about 3 meters or 10 feet long. Represented by multiple specimens, Maimuropelta possessed 5 different types of osteoderm armour and a flexible tail that was lined with pointed spikes rather than a bony club as seen in Ankylosaurids. This, in combination with the animal's narrow muzzle adapted for selective browsing, has often led paleontologists to classify it as a basal and very early nodosaurid. Interestingly, Maimuropelta possessed a very small range, with fossils only having been recovered from 2 sites in western Colorado. It was a rough contemporary of the other Morrison ankylosaur Gargoyleosaurus, and the two have often been viewed as closely related basal nodosaurids. It was similar in size to Maimuropelta at about 3 meters or 10 feet long, and potentially weighed about half a metric ton. The genus is known from a relatively complete holotype found at the Bone Cabin West locality in Wyoming, and would have also been a low-browsing selective herbivore. Moving into the Cretaceous period, the nodosaurids and their later appearing sister group, the Ankylosaurids, would go on to diversify rapidly, expanding in size and filling the niches left over by the extinction of the stegosaurs during the Albion. However, those complex developments are best left for another time. Thanks for watching, everyone. Before I go, I'd just like to remind you that if my videos are of interest, then please feel free to support me on Patreon, where you can gain ad-free access to my videos before they go live on YouTube, as well as being able to suggest ideas for future episodes. Next time I'll be covering the Macronarian sauropods, so until then I'll see you again soon. Cheerio.